Welcome back to another episode of Real Talk, everybody. If you are new to these kinds of videos or my channel, this type of video is done as sort of an impromptu and off-the-cuff remark on politics, culture, and just the general goings-on in our world, whether online or on the ground. My reflection for you all today is about the power of myth. We're surrounded by great mythos and mythologies all over in the West, whether it's the great stories of old, such as that of the Song of Roland or Beowulf, or real-life historical characters that seem larger than life, like Charles Martel, or that of Charlemagne, or Richard the Lionheart. All these characters build up in our mind of the great traditions and epics and the mythos of our Western culture. Just in the same way here in America, one can travel across various fields in the South or across Virginia and recognize the great mythos, tragedy, and the men that had fought and died for their respective states and their beliefs. But the reason why I bring up mythos and mythology today is because all of us know how powerful that mythology can be, whether it's mythology of great men, history, heroic, and epicness that we can see most often associated with the right, but it's just as powerful as we see it on the left. Others like to call it the boomer truth regime, or simply the product of the post-World War II era, such as the Nuremberg Consensus. However, I find it to be important for us to look at sort of this rather liberal or mainstream perspective of mythology, because it is incredibly powerful for us to understand, because it's often that we provide ourselves with our own version of history, the one that we believe to be true. Oftentimes we see it just across the aisle and across our ideological opposites, and we see the exact same thing charging at us full strength. Except for them, their belief system is state-sanctioned. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because the midterms just happened, and we kind of saw the results of it, and now everyone is seemingly talking about 2024. And I wanted to share with you all my own personal story on political mythology. I, for one, was a strong believer and advocate of participating in the American civic religion, of American civic duty, the idea that we could get along and resolve our differences through dialogue and trying to come up with our own solution, that despite how extreme things could be, that somehow we could manage to get together and figure it all out. I distinctly remember my time in college as I was entering my junior year, warning about the perils of political extremism on both the left and the right. As someone who was more moderately oriented and much more of a Rand Paul, Ron Paul type conservative, I still believed heavily into the civic system. So much that when I turned 18 years old in high school, I was incredibly excited not to buy cigarettes, not to buy porn, not to think about any other kind of activity that you can do once you're 18, but instead I was excited to vote. And in 2014, well, I had that opportunity presented to me. I got to vote in the 2014 midterm primaries as my first ballot ever casted. And not only was it interesting to be the only young person who was remotely considered and interested in voting, but also to be the only person voting in the GOP primary in the place where I lived at that time. Needless to say, I had gotten sucked into the world of party politics and local political action. Whether that was working as a staffer for various political campaigns that were most likely and most assuredly doomed to fail by nature of being a Republican candidate inside of El Paso County, Texas, but in addition to the fact for phone banking, creating flyers and other things to leave on various doors and houses, all that sort of stuff I fell in love with. And I thought how great it was that someone as young as I am can appreciate how democracy works on the ground level. I was trained to be an elections judge. I held the office of precinct chair for a term. I thought it was the most incredible thing in the world that someone who was in his college years could do. And it says a lot when I can complain about how the electoral process works today when just a few short years ago, someone as young and as naive as myself could easily pick up, set up, operate a voting booth system for everyone to cast their ballots, and return and have the results tabulated, calculated, and published only a few short hours later. But perhaps that conversation can be found elsewhere in other videos and streams that I've done. But I say all this because even now, where I have such a more pessimistic view of how the democratic system operates, where I've read so many treatises, articles, essays, books that criticize how democracy functions, from Schmidt to de Maistre to Hobbes, to anyone who recognizes the importance of having a sovereign entity, or that of patriarcha, and the importance of the divine right of kings. Yet as we talk about all these things, and I look back at my own voting record, and I look back on how this country has been operating under its own democratic process, I can't help but find myself with this bittersweet nostalgia, knowing that voting and everything that came with it, and that includes electoral skullduggery, it's baked into the American political process, whether one wants to admit it or not. Free and fair elections in this country have not been a thing ever since Hamilton tried to write and convince the electors to vote for George Washington in the manner that he so wanted. Yet, it's part of my tradition. It's part of my mythos growing up as an American here in the United States, and it's incredibly powerful. And I'm also uniquely aware, by nature of being a student of American history, just how important it was, not only for those of the more aristocratic and landed gentry to have the vote, but also to know how important it was that political machines are the reason that a lot of electoral process and politics got moving in the first place. I think of the political machines outside of New York City, Philadelphia, or Chicago, Boss Tweed and the progressive movement. I think about all of these things, not to mention the various immigrant groups that were used to create votes early in the beginning of the 20th century. All of these things come to my mind because it has a very tarnished past, but it is one that is uniquely a part of the American tradition. And I say this now as a man who is entering his late 20s looking back, thinking, wow, it took several years to have a really more evolved and nuanced view in politics. I wonder what it would have been like if I had never been exposed to alternative political ideas, whether they be on the extreme left or the extreme right. Lord knows that every day in university I was exposed to postmodernists, deconstructionists, individuals that wanted to dismantle what they considered to be a white, patriarchal, capitalist system of imperialism and death and destruction, and yet here I am. Needless to say, I can't help but think about the power that myth still has for our ideological foes, even individuals that we claim are not based or red-pilled enough, despite having a sympathetic ear to our side. And what really spurred this on, not just because of the midterms or the power of voting, was a recent video I was watching, and it happened to have underneath in the recommended tab a recommended video by Vaush, of all people, of BreadTube infamy. Even dyed-in-the-wool hardcore socialists think he serves the regime, and I think that's one area where the socialists and ourselves can really agree on. And I couldn't help but think to myself, as the video title had something along the lines of Vaush saying that the GOP was really upset over Generation Z. And I couldn't help but think to myself, well, that's probably true to some objective sense. Obviously, the Republican Party will never win the youth vote. Conservatives have never won the youth vote as long as I've been alive, and much longer than that, let's be honest. But at that same time, I can't help but think to myself about how mythologies get started. New atheists like to complain that religious bigotry, or religious dogmas and doctrines, and how, they believe in some weird sky daddy and things like that, they complain that those beliefs start because their children are indoctrinated because their parents take them to church when they are young. And, well, the answer to that is, well, obviously, it's a social good. We're called by God to do so. But at the same time, that observation works really, really well when we consider the very individuals that we deem to be progressive, dysgenic, spiteful mutants, etc., etc. They don't have children. And so what is the way in which their mythos is reproduced? It's latched on. It attaches as if it's some sort of barnacle to a ship or a whale. And in doing so, a generational landmass, or the organic mass, the whale of a generation, especially Gen Z as large as it is, now all of a sudden is attached with a mind virus to itself, not by people that can reproduce it naturally through the means of sexual reproduction, but naturally through the means of having every controllable access to where your children go. social media, YouTube, children's entertainment, children's films, Hollywood, television, radio, TikTok, everything that you can think of. And I don't remember where I had seen this post, but it was really good, where it was complaining that you really think that maybe 30 minutes of Sunday school time every week is going to match the tens of thousands of hours of public school education they're going to get that week or that year, on top of all the social media, all the friend interactions, all of the time online, all of the time watching movies and stuff like that you're not moderating as a parent. It's almost as if we have given up most of our sovereignty as parents. I'm not a parent myself, but looking back, I'm certainly thankful that my father had installed parental locks and controls over keywords and websites when I was in middle school. It didn't do me a lot of good, because either A, I figured out how to bypass them, or B, I managed to have him convinced to turn them off for research, but neither here nor there. The intent was the good thing. It was proactive parenting. Not to say the fact that I still didn't find 4chan when I was in middle school, but perhaps that's why I'm such a wreck. I say all these things because we're not proactive enough on the youth. We're not proactive enough on parenting our children and rearing them right. The phrase, "it takes a village to raise a child," I think has a lot of value in that. I see that especially in religious communities. I see it within my own parish, that there are times when, for instance, by nature of people having work schedules and the like, that sometimes only one parent is there for services on Saturday afternoon for Vespers. And oftentimes I have been asked, hey, if the kids get rowdy, do you mind putting them in their place? Not that I'm given carte blanche on corporal punishment, but oftentimes it just means that one of the kids is in my arm while the priest is moving around with the censer. And it's vital, I think, for us to think in community lenses, because we, as individuals, and those that wish to preserve traditions, whether oral, religious, spiritual, historical, texts, whatever, it behooves us to act in terms of a community. Now, many of us on this side of things will know that individuals of all types of political and ideological and spiritual persuasions often communicate with each other. And of course, of all ages. For instance, Semiagog is older than myself, but at the same time, I've had conversations with him and gentlemen much younger than me, like Ryan Turnipseed, on this channel before. And to me, I find that to be an incredibly good thing, a sense of communal and intergenerational bonds. But they're online. We can do more, I think, to instill our mythos, our political formula, not just on ourselves and our cohorts and our families, but onto our progeny and our posterity. It's vital, and I think one of the things that has come to terms with myself in this realization is that there's going to be an uphill battle for really any parent going forward, and parents already who are, having young children right now. Imagine just how much crap that we complain about all the time, all the bread tubers, all of the grooming, all of the laws that are saying and telling you that if your child decides to identify one way, your rights are more or less null and void because the object of consent no longer matters to young children, and the very well-worn argument of the slippery slope loses its fallacy status, as it has been for years. But to wrap this all up, I guess, in some pretty impromptu, off-the-cuff style bow, myths are incredibly powerful. We are instilled with them when we're young, depending on where we live and how we're socialized. Everyone knows this. And the fact is that over the last 60 years, we have watched the complete abdication, both by various laws, cultural movements, ideologies, and trends for power, to take away parental responsibility, ensure that things like prayer in schools and Bible studies and various things that keep a culture homogeneous, both in its beliefs and its good and best practices as a society, are thrown by the wayside. And in doing so, we have now inherited, and we are now born into, a world where the things that you and I most likely have similar beliefs in, or ideas about how the world really works, are deemed extreme, or are deemed just to be not politically correct. And when that time comes for us to have children of our own, or to foster and build community and break bread with our neighbors, it allows us to understand that the mythos that we believe in is still very much in the minority, at least in terms of the popular culture. Myth is incredibly powerful. We have our beliefs because we got here through our own understanding, through community learning, and realizing that a lot of the things that we were raised to believe on were not as accurate as they may seem, and in fact, the myths are built on a lot of bunk. But for our ideological opposites, our foes, our enemies, I dare say, they have a lot more control over the airwaves, the media, and the radio. I'm not saying anything new, but what I'm saying is that mythos is powerful, and it takes a long time for us to get to where we are. And once we get started, it's usually quick, but it does take time sometimes to shake off the rose-colored glasses and realize that, oh, those weren't just flags, those were red flags along every path I seem to be walking on. Mythology, of course, is powerful, and I've said that now more than once on this video, but I think it's important for us to remember that when we engage with our family, that we engage with our friends, especially with it being so close to the holidays here in America, both with Thanksgiving and Christmas time, that we're aware of that, especially as we engage with those that we may not necessarily agree with. So I'll leave it there. We should do more about our youth, we should do more about our posterity, and realize that it is going to take a lot more of our time to engage and invest in with our youth and our communities, lest we watch every possible form of avenues of control and domination, whether it be various laws, popular culture, even BreadTube for God's sakes, take away your opportunity to instill that mythology, that belief, that truth that you believe in. So, I'll leave it there. I hope that you've enjoyed the fish that were caught on this video. This may be the last real talk as things get much colder as we head closer to winter. So I'll bid you all farewell. I'll see you all in the next video. God be with you, and be prudent, everyone. Take care.